Please don't leave me here." The words were almost lost beneath the scream of the winter wind. Eleanor Vance stood knee-deep in snow beside the frozen trail, one trembling hand wrapped around a wooden fence post that had stopped her from collapsing completely. At 67 years old, with silver-gray hair gathered beneath a soaked wool bonnet and wearing her familiar faded navy blue prairie dress beneath a heavy gray shawl, she looked painfully small against the white violence of the blizzard. Her horse was gone, the road was disappearing, and somewhere beyond the wall of snow, she heard the sound of another horse moving away. "Please," Eleanor cried again. "Don't leave me here." The rider stopped. For one long second, nothing moved except the snow. Then the horse continued forward. Eleanor closed her eyes. She had already walked too far to return to Silver Creek. Her fingers were numb. Her boots were filling with ice. The blizzard had swallowed every landmark, and she knew what happened to people who disappeared during storms like this. They froze. Sometimes they were found in the spring. Sometimes they were never found at all. Eleanor lowered herself slowly into the snow. Then, through the roaring wind, she heard hoofbeats. They were coming back. A dark figure emerged through the storm, riding a powerful black horse. The rider pulled sharply on the reins and stopped several yards away. He did not dismount. Even through the snow, Eleanor recognized him. Caleb Mercer, 41 years old, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged, weathered face, dark brown hair beneath his distinctive black Stetson, and a neatly trimmed dark beard. He wore his familiar dark brown leather winter coat over a charcoal wool shirt, heavy riding gloves, dark trousers, and worn leather boots. Caleb stared down at her. "You shouldn't be on this road," he said. Eleanor almost laughed. "I had noticed." His expression did not change. That frightened her more than the storm. She had seen Caleb Mercer earlier that morning in Silver Creek, and she knew exactly why he was traveling this direction. He was supposed to be heading back to Mercer Ridge before the weather became impossible. Instead, he had found an old widow freezing beside the road. And judging by the look in his eyes, he was already regretting turning around. "Where is your horse?" Caleb asked. "It ran." "How?" Eleanor looked away. "I fell." Caleb glanced at the trail disappearing behind her. "How long ago?" She did not answer. "Mrs. Vance." "Long enough." His jaw tightened. "You can't stay here. I know that too." Caleb looked toward the distant hills. The storm was becoming worse by the minute. "My ranch is the opposite direction," he said. Eleanor understood what he meant. Turning around for her could cost him hours, maybe his own life. She pushed herself upright, though her legs nearly failed beneath her. "Then go." Caleb frowned. "You heard me. You just asked me not to leave you. That was before I knew it was you." For the first time, something changed in Caleb's expression. Not anger, recognition. Because everyone in Silver Creek knew Eleanor Vance. They knew about her small ranch. They knew about the debt she had inherited after her husband died. And they knew Caleb Mercer had recently made an offer to buy her land. An offer Eleanor had refused. "I'm not buying your ranch by leaving you in a snowbank," Caleb said. "I didn't say you were. Then why tell me to go?" Eleanor looked directly at him. "Because men like you always have somewhere warm to return to." The words hung between them. Caleb's eyes hardened. "You think I came back because I want something? I think nobody comes back for nothing." For several seconds, the rancher said nothing. Then a sharp crack echoed somewhere behind them. Caleb turned immediately. Eleanor froze. What was that? Could have been a branch. But Caleb slowly reached beneath his coat. But branches don't usually sound like gunfire. The wind suddenly felt colder. Eleanor stared into the white storm behind her. Caleb dismounted. "What are you doing?" she asked. He walked toward her. "Getting you on the horse. You said your ranch is the opposite direction." "It is." "Then why did you turn around?" Caleb stopped directly in front of her. Snow covered the brim of his black Stetson. His face was hard and unreadable. Then he looked past her, toward the road where the sound had come from. "That depends," he said quietly, "on who else was following you." Eleanor felt the blood leave her face, because she had not told Caleb everything. She had not fallen from her horse. Someone had chased her, and just before her horse disappeared into the storm, Eleanor had seen 3 riders coming through the snow. Caleb lifted her into the saddle. "Hold on." Eleanor grabbed his coat. Behind them, another gunshot shattered the silence. This time, Caleb did not hesitate. He turned his horse around. and rode straight into the blizzard with the woman he had every reason to leave behind. Caleb Mercer rode hard into the blizzard, but after only a few minutes, Eleanor realized they were not heading toward his ranch. The black horse fought through the deepening snow while the wind tore across the open valley with enough force to make breathing painful. Eleanor clung to Caleb's dark brown leather winter coat, her numb fingers barely able to hold on. "Where are we going?" she shouted. Caleb did not answer immediately. He turned his head, listening. Behind them, somewhere beyond the curtain of snow, came the faint sound of hoofbeats. Eleanor tightened her grip. "They're still following us." Caleb's jaw hardened beneath his neatly trimmed dark beard. "I know." The words sent a deeper chill through her than the winter air. Caleb pulled the horse toward a narrow line of trees barely visible through the storm. "There's an old trapping cabin about 2 miles from here." Eleanor looked toward the darkness ahead. "And your ranch?" "Too far. You said it was the opposite direction." "It is." "Then why aren't we going there?" Caleb glanced back toward the trail. "Because if those riders know you're with me, they'll know exactly where to find us." Eleanor said nothing. For the first time since Caleb had turned his horse around, she understood that he had not simply agreed to help her. By taking her with him, he had placed himself directly between her and whoever had been chasing her through the storm. Another gunshot cracked behind them. The black horse jumped sideways. Eleanor nearly lost her grip. Caleb caught her arm and steadied her. "Hold on. Who are they?" he demanded. Eleanor looked away. "I don't know." Caleb turned sharply toward her. "3 men are riding through a blizzard and shooting at us. You know something." "I said I don't know who they are." "That isn't what I asked." Eleanor's silence lasted too long. Caleb faced forward again, anger tightening across his rugged face. "Mrs. Vance, if I'm risking my life out here, I need to know why. I didn't ask you to risk anything. You asked me not to leave you." "Yes." Her voice broke. "I didn't ask you to die with me." Caleb pulled the horse beneath the shelter of the trees and finally brought it to a stop. Snow clung to his black Stetson and dark beard as he turned toward her. "Then tell me the truth." Eleanor stared at him. For a moment, she considered saying nothing. She had spent too many years learning that silence was safer. But outside the thin cover of the trees, another set of hoofbeats moved through the storm. "Closer now." "Yesterday," she finally said, "a man came to my ranch." Caleb's expression changed. "Who?" "His name was Walter Grady." Caleb went still. Eleanor noticed immediately. "You know him." "Everyone knows Walter Grady." "Then you know he doesn't usually visit old widows in the middle of winter." Caleb looked toward the white darkness. "What did he want?" Eleanor swallowed. "My land." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You already refused my offer. Your offer was honest." "And his wasn't?" Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. "Mr. Grady doesn't make offers. He explains what will happen when you refuse." Caleb's face darkened. Walter Grady owned one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, but people in Silver Creek knew better than to speak openly about how he had built it. Ranches changed hands around him. Debts appeared. Fences burned. Livestock disappeared. And somehow, Grady always seemed to arrive afterward with enough money to solve the owner's problems. "What does he want with your ranch?" Caleb asked. Eleanor pulled her gray shawl tighter around herself. "That's what I asked him." "And?" "He said my husband made a mistake before he died." Caleb slowly looked back at her. Eleanor's husband, Thomas Vance, had been dead for 11 years. He had died after falling from his horse near the northern ridge. Everyone had called it an accident. Eleanor had never completely believed it. "What mistake?" Caleb asked. "Grady didn't say." Her eyes lowered. "He only told me to find something Thomas had hidden and give it to him." Caleb stared at her. "Find what?" "I don't know." "Where did he think it was?" Eleanor looked toward the storm. "At the ranch." Caleb's expression hardened. "Then why were you on this road?" Eleanor's hands trembled beneath the shawl. "Because last night, someone broke into my house." Caleb said nothing. "They searched Thomas's study. They tore apart his desk. This morning, I found a message on the kitchen table." "What message?" Eleanor reached inside the front of her dress and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. Caleb unfolded it. There were only 6 words written in dark ink. "Leave before the snow starts falling." Caleb read it twice. Then his eyes moved toward her. "You were running." Eleanor nodded. "I thought I could reach Silver Creek before the storm became too bad." "And your horse?" Her face changed. "They frightened him." Caleb looked at her carefully. "They?" Eleanor closed her eyes. I saw riders behind me. The black horse suddenly shifted beneath them. Caleb's hand moved toward his rifle. From somewhere beyond the trees came the sound of men shouting. Eleanor's eyes widened. They found us. Caleb looked toward the narrow path leading deeper into the woods. The cabin is still a mile away. Then ride. Caleb did not move. What? Eleanor asked. He looked past her, toward the open trail they had just left. There's something wrong. Another sound came through the storm. Not hoofbeats. Wood breaking. Caleb dismounted and stepped toward the edge of the trees. Stay here. Eleanor watched him disappear briefly into the white snow. Seconds later, he returned, his expression colder than before. What is it? She asked. Caleb looked directly at her. The bridge is gone. Eleanor stared at him. What bridge? The one between us and the cabin. The storm roared around them. The only safe shelter for miles was now on the other side of a ravine they could no longer cross. Then, from somewhere in the darkness behind them, a man's voice carried through the blizzard. Mrs. Vance? Eleanor froze. Caleb slowly raised his rifle. The voice came again, closer this time. We know you're out there. Eleanor looked at Caleb, terror finally breaking through the strength she had tried to hold on to. Caleb grabbed the reins of his horse. Listen to me carefully. What are we going to do? He looked toward the frozen ravine, then toward the approaching riders. We're going somewhere they won't expect. Eleanor stared at him. Where? Caleb's eyes moved toward a dark shape barely visible beneath the snow-covered hillside. Underground. Caleb Mercer led the black horse toward the dark shape beneath the hillside, but Eleanor Vance could barely see where they were going. The blizzard had swallowed the trees behind them, the trail ahead, and almost everything beyond a few feet of white, swirling snow. Still, Caleb moved with the certainty of a man who knew the land better than the storm. Underground? Eleanor shouted over the wind. Caleb did not look back. An old mining tunnel. Eleanor tightened her grip around his dark brown leather winter coat. You expect us to hide in a mine? I expect us to freeze if we stay out here. Behind them came the faint sound of hoofbeats. Caleb urged the powerful black horse forward. Hold on. Eleanor pressed closer against him as they descended toward the hillside. Her soaked gray shawl was stiff with ice, and the cold had begun to change. Her hands no longer hurt. Her fingers felt distant, almost chujimi. Caleb, she said. What? I can't feel my fingers. His broad shoulders stiffened. He immediately pulled the horse beneath a rocky overhang and dismounted. Stay awake, Eleanor tried to smile. That sounds easy when you're not the one freezing. Caleb lifted her down, but her legs nearly collapsed beneath her. He caught her before she hit the snow. Can you walk? Yes. She took one step and stumbled again. Caleb looked toward the approaching hoofbeats, then back at Eleanor. Without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms. Caleb, save your strength. The entrance was narrow, almost hidden beneath wind-blown snow and frozen branches. Caleb pushed through and carried Eleanor inside. At once, the sound of the blizzard became distant. He set her beside a stone wall and removed a lantern from his saddlebag. When the flame came alive, Eleanor looked around. The tunnel was old, but it was not empty. Dry firewood rested beside a stone fire pit. Empty tins sat on a shelf. Someone had been using this place. You said this was abandoned, Eleanor whispered. Caleb crouched beside the ashes and touched them. His expression hardened. It was supposed to be. He rubbed the ash between his fingers. This is still warm. Eleanor stared into the darkness beyond the lantern. Someone was here. Recently. Caleb quickly arranged wood inside the fire pit and struck a match. As the flames began to grow, he removed his dark brown leather winter coat and wrapped it around Eleanor's shoulders. What about you? She asked. I have another layer. You're lying. Probably. Despite the danger, Eleanor almost smiled. Then Caleb picked up his rifle. Stay here. Eleanor grabbed his arm. Don't. He looked down at her. Someone could still be inside. And you're going to walk into that darkness alone? Caleb's rugged face remained calm, but his eyes said otherwise. If they know this tunnel, they may know another way in. Eleanor slowly released him. Caleb disappeared deeper into the passage. Alone beside the fire, Eleanor noticed something lying near the stone wall. She picked it up. It was a leather strap with a metal buckle. Stamped into the leather was a symbol she had seen before, a circle crossed by 3 lines. Her breath caught. Thomas had carved the same symbol into the wall of their barn 11 years earlier. She had asked him what it meant. He had told her it was nothing. Now she knew he had lied. Caleb returned moments later, but before Eleanor could speak, a voice echoed from deeper inside the tunnel. "You should have kept riding, Mercer." Caleb immediately raised his rifle. Eleanor stood slowly. "Who is that?" The voice laughed. "Walter Grady says the old woman has something that belongs to him." Caleb stepped in front of Eleanor. "You're not taking her." The voice grew colder. "Then perhaps we should ask you what Thomas Vance hid." Eleanor stared at Caleb. "You knew about Thomas?" Caleb's silence lasted 1 second too long. Before he could answer, the fire flickered violently. A shadow moved across the tunnel wall. Then, from behind them, near the entrance they believed was secure, came the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Caleb slowly turned. They were no longer hiding from the men in the storm. They were trapped between them. Caleb Mercer did not lower his rifle. The sound behind them came again, slow and deliberate, followed by the scrape of a boot against stone. Eleanor Vance stood beside the fire, wrapped in Caleb's dark brown leather winter coat, her silver-gray hair still gathered beneath her soaked wool bonnet, while trembling shadows moved across the walls of the tunnel. Caleb stepped backward until he stood directly in front of her. "There are 2 of them," Eleanor whispered. Caleb listened. One man was deeper inside the tunnel. The other had entered through the passage behind them. They were trapped. "Step away from the woman," a voice called from behind them. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. "Tell Walter Grady to come himself." The man laughed. "You think this is about Grady?" Eleanor felt Caleb's body tense. Another voice echoed from deeper inside. Thomas Vance was warned not to involve anyone outside the valley. Eleanor stepped forward. "Who are you?" Caleb held out his arm, stopping her. "Your husband found records," the voice continued. "Names, payments, land transfers, ranches that changed hands after their owners died, disappeared, or lost everything." Eleanor's face went pale. Walter Grady had not wanted her ranch because she was old or weak. Thomas had hidden something connected to it. "Thomas hid the records," Eleanor said. "Yes. Where?" The darkness became silent. Then the man behind them laughed. "That's what we've been trying to find out." A gunshot exploded through the tunnel. Stones shattered beside the fire. Caleb pulled Eleanor behind a large rock formation and returned fire once. "Are you hit?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. Another shot struck above them. Caleb checked his rifle. "How many bullets?" Eleanor whispered. "Enough to make everyone count." She stared at him. "That isn't comforting. It wasn't meant to be." As the men repositioned themselves, Eleanor noticed a thin current of warmer air moving through a crack in the stone wall. She crawled closer. "Caleb." "Not now." "Caleb." He followed her eyes. One loose rock shifted when he pressed against it. Behind it was a narrow passage descending into darkness. Another gunshot struck the stone. Caleb grabbed the lantern. "Can you walk?" Eleanor looked at the opening, then at the men closing in. "I don't have much choice." She crawled through first, her gray shawl catching against the rough stone. Caleb followed, pulling several rocks back into place. The passage sloped downward until it suddenly opened into a hidden chamber. The lantern revealed old shelves, rusted tools, and a heavy iron chest in the center. Both stopped. Carved into the wall above it was the same symbol, a circle crossed by 3 lines. Eleanor stared at the chest. Thomas was here. Caleb stepped toward it. Behind them came the sound of rocks being moved. The men had found the passage. "Open it," Eleanor said. "The lock is old." "Then break it." Caleb raised his rifle and struck the lock until it snapped. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, leather-bound ledgers, and a small wooden box. Eleanor recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately. Her hands trembled. Caleb opened one of the ledgers and his face changed. "Eleanor." She moved beside him. The pages listed ranches across the valley, dates, payments, and the names of men who had profited after families lost their land. Then Eleanor saw Thomas's name. Beneath it was a single entry. Property transfer failed. Witness did not survive. Her breath stopped. They killed him. Caleb looked at her, his face hardening. Yes. But then he turned another page and froze. Eleanor followed his eyes. Another name appeared beside Thomas's entry. Caleb's father. Caleb slowly reached for the wooden box. Written across the lid were words in faded ink. The box was addressed to Eleanor. Beneath her name was one final warning. Trust no one. Not even him. Eleanor Vance stared at the wooden box, as if the words on its lid had struck her harder than the freezing wind outside ever could. Trust no one. Not even him. Caleb Mercer stood beside her, silent, his rugged face illuminated by the weak lantern light. His dark brown hair was visible beneath his worn black winter hat, and snow still clung to the shoulders of his dark brown leather winter coat. Eleanor slowly looked at him. What does that mean? Caleb did not answer immediately. Somewhere behind the loose stones at the entrance to the hidden chamber, men were still searching through the tunnel. Their voices echoed faintly through the passage. Caleb reached toward the box. We need to get out of here. Eleanor pulled it away from him. No. His eyes met hers. Eleanor, my husband hid this for 11 years. He died before he could tell me why. Now I find a warning telling me not to trust you. And you want me to walk away without an explanation? Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't know what Thomas meant. But you knew my husband was investigating something. Silence. That was enough. Eleanor stepped backward, clutching the box against her chest. How much did you know? Caleb lowered his rifle. My father knew Thomas. Eleanor's face hardened. That isn't what I asked. Another sound came from the tunnel. A rock shifted. The men were getting closer. Caleb glanced toward the entrance, then back at her. My father helped Thomas hide those records. Eleanor stared at him. What? They discovered Grady had been taking land from families who couldn't defend themselves. Widows, men who disappeared, ranchers forced into debt. Caleb's voice grew lower. Thomas found proof that the deaths weren't always accidents. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the wooden box. And your father? Caleb looked toward the ledger lying open inside the iron chest. My father was supposed to take the evidence to a federal marshal. Did he? Caleb hesitated. Eleanor already knew the answer. No. Her voice broke, but she refused to cry. Why? Because Grady threatened his family. Caleb looked directly at her. He waited too long. Eleanor felt the chamber grow colder. Thomas had died because someone had waited. Caleb's father had known. Perhaps he had been afraid. Perhaps he had tried to fix his mistake afterward. But Thomas was still dead. So that's why you turned your horse around, Eleanor whispered. Caleb frowned. What? The night you found me. She looked at him with new understanding. You knew who I was. Caleb said nothing. Eleanor laughed once, bitterly. I thought you stopped because you heard me begging not to leave me there. Caleb stepped closer. I did hear you. But you knew my name. His silence lasted too long. Eleanor looked away. You knew exactly who you were rescuing. Caleb finally spoke. My father left me a letter before he died. Eleanor slowly turned back toward him. What did it say? Caleb reached inside his coat and removed a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, as though he had carried it for years. He handed it to her. Eleanor opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was short. If anything happens to Eleanor Vance, do not let Grady reach her first. Her breath caught. Caleb continued quietly. I didn't know where you were until 3 days ago. Who told you? Caleb's expression changed. Walter Grady. Eleanor went still. Before she could ask another question, the sound of a gunshot exploded through the stones behind them. Dust fell from the ceiling. Caleb grabbed Eleanor's arm. We have to move. No more secrets, she said. Not if you expect me to trust you. Caleb looked at her for one long second, then he nodded. Fair enough. He quickly gathered the ledgers and maps, but Eleanor kept the wooden box. Together, they entered a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber. The tunnel sloped upward, barely wide enough for them to walk side by side. Behind them, voices grew louder. They're through! Someone shouted. Caleb pushed Eleanor forward. Faster. They emerged from the mountain on the opposite side, just as the blizzard began to weaken. Below them stretched a frozen valley, white and silent beneath the gray morning sky. Eleanor suddenly stopped. Caleb followed her eyes. A line of riders was moving across the valley, at least 6 men. Walter Grady rode at the front, but what frightened Eleanor was not that they were searching for her. They were riding toward the Vance ranch. Smoke rose in the distance. Eleanor's face went pale. My house. Caleb looked through the snow. They're already there. Eleanor clutched the wooden box tightly against her chest. The papers. Caleb's expression hardened. They know we found them. Another sound reached them through the cold morning air. It was not gunfire. It was the deep, heavy crack of timber collapsing. Eleanor took one step forward. They're burning it. Caleb caught her arm. If you ride straight in, you'll die. Eleanor looked at him. For the first time since he had turned his horse around in the blizzard, there was no fear in her eyes. Only anger. Then help me find another way. Caleb looked toward the burning ranch, then toward the riders surrounding it. He slowly reached for his rifle. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Eleanor had spent 11 years believing her husband died in an accident. But one night in the middle of a blizzard changed everything. The man who turned his horse around to save her was carrying secrets of his own. And now, with Thomas's evidence in their hands, Eleanor finally knew the truth. But Walter Grady had made his move. Her home was burning. And in the frozen valley below, the men who killed her husband were waiting. This time, Eleanor wasn't running. Part 2 was about to begin.